Hello again and welcome to part 10 of the Prinz Eugen build. This part will be spread over quite a long period of time. I have a lot going on in my life just now and I'm getting really pushed for time to get these videos out. But I hope that we'll manage to do it not too much of a delay. The area that we're going to cover in part 10 is the forward command tower and the conning tower. These are generally the highest parts of the ship, and in this case they cover the lower navigating bridge, the conning tower where the ship's fought from, and then a command tower which goes up to an upper navigating bridge. There's a platform for a 40mm cannon, there's an observation deck, and then there's the upper conning tower where the gunnery officer sits. And on top of all of that, we've got an optical director and rangefinder and two sets of radar. Just above the lower conning tower there's also another optical director and rangefinder. So there's quite a few decks, quite a few bits and pieces to be done. And what I'm intending to do is to build them as separate sections or separate units, which we will assemble towards the end of the build. But there's a lot of wee ladders and companionways to be put in, so I'm going to do it in sections and we'll combine it later. But let's get started because there's a lot to do. Okay, now I just wanted to lay one of the decks of the command tower out to let you see how complicated it is between the plastic, brass and wood. And here we have this deck here. This deck will have the navigation bridge, and moving from the front of the bridge to the back up here, I'm going to go through all the parts that we have. First of all, this is a brass part, and it's meant to replace, I think it's four plastic parts. This is the front facing section. We then have the side sections there and the roof here. So we have a fold to do there, a fold to do there, a fold to do there, and these wee lugs get folded in as well. And that sits with that part of the bridge there mounted there, and that part will be folded round to fit there, and that part will be folded round to fit there. That's the top, and it folds over and meets the tower, which is coming up here to the next level. Then we've got a couple of wee parts there and there that sit here and here, and they have a railing which is to be folded round. So that railing there goes round that small part there where I think it's where an observer would stand, possibly with binoculars. Coming back from that, we then have here, and again on the other side, what look like life belts, and they'll be fitted on the front face there. We then have two more of these wee railed off foot platforms, and they'll go there and there. That's that and that. Then in the ship, these had railings on them, and these parts here are intended to indicate railings with canvas dodgers on them, and they fit in that gap there and that gap there. Then, actually, within the deck itself, I have laid an Artworks wooden deck. Let me just see if I can. That lifts up like that, but it fits in there. This part is brass, and it fits underneath there. Fairly straightforward to do, easy to do, no problem with that. But if we turn this over, you'll see but there are a lot of struts underneath here. There's a pair there, two at the front there, and a series of them at the back. And they are replaced by these brass pieces here. They will be more difficult to do. But if I'm taking, but I'll have to take these off with a knife to fit this. And so thereafter these parts will have to go on. So just on this one deck level itself, there's quite a lot of brass work to be done and pieces to be removed. And that goes for all the deck levels in the command tower. Let me just get this over and we'll lay that on top just now so that you can see what we're talking about and zoom back out of it. That's the page that we're talking about. Which shows the construction of most, indeed all of the command tower's decks, all the 4 command towers' decks. You'll also notice that, for example, there is here a radar system. There are bits of radar elsewhere. I think these are radar parts, but there are various other radar parts, almost all brass. This is complicated to make because I've had a quick look at it. There's a lot of folding to go on, but that will replace that. The brass photo etch will replace that. But that's the 4 command tower, and that's what we're going to be building now. So I'm just going to proceed with the building up of this. I'll take photographs as we go through it so that you can see what's happening. But this Artworks wooden deck will certainly not go on till after it's all been painted, because excuse me, as we prime it, you really can't have wood being primed. There's no point in having wood if you're going to prime it and paint it. But so what we'll do is we'll mask off the inside of this to make sure the deck fits all right. Bless my phone. The rest of it will get primed and painted as appropriate, and it'll almost all be, I think, in the light grey, the lightest of the greys. Okay, so I'll proceed onward with that and take some photographs as we go along. At each other level of this command tower, I'll introduce you to it and then do the same thing, photograph it as we go along. The first part of the command tower structure to be built is the base deck house, and it can be seen here with the 4 walls and the roof. There are 2 brass parts to be added to this, and they're both taken from fret B. The first of these is a replacement for the front circular area, and the second is a railed platform at the rear of the deck house. And you can see in the exploded diagrams how these fit together. The next photograph is of the deck house itself from underneath, being test fitted, and everything went well with the test fit, and that is how it appears on the top of the 2 upper decks that we made in part 9. The next part that we have to do is the lower navigating bridge and conning tower, and again you can see it here with one of the side walls already test fitted, and then there's a front wall, the rear face of the conning tower, the other side wall, and to the right of that photograph there are the lower gun director with the optical rangefinders and a small mast that goes on top of that. And there you can see it assembled completely from the front and also from the rear, with the brass cross trees of the mast added. Here we see that lower deck house with its brass parts in place, and on top of it the lowest part of the tower structure test fitted. The next level up that we have is the upper navigation bridge, shown here complete with all of the brasswork in place. However, to get there, firstly the moulded in struts underneath had to be removed to allow the brass base to be put in place,
and then the navigation structure has to be folded and glued. I use tape to hold it in place while the glue is setting. Then all of the brasswork can be attached. Moving on upwards, there's the next tower assembly with a 40mm gun platform facing forward. This platform also has a small brass piece attached to the front. I'm not sure what it is, but looking at Goralski's book, it may have been for a navigation light. Above that is the last of the platforms on the command tower, with the upper conning tower in place in the centre of it. There are also some brass ladders and railings, and 4 aerials for the FUMB-4 Samos set, using Sumatra antennae. And sitting on top of the upper conning tower was the upper director with optical sights and radar direction aerials, with the very top having an octagonal position for the battle observer post, also in brass. Here you can see it fully assembled from the rear and also from the front. There are 2 radar arrays. The upper is the FUMO 26 array and the lower is a Timor array for the passive radar detector, but this one's trainable to give bearing.
Well, excuse me, let's have a look now at the complete structure, the complete command tower structure for the forward fuselage. Excuse me, the forward deck area. This sits on top of the upper deck, this structure. On top of this, in this area here, sits this structure here. Now, this is the lower navigating bridge at the front, and the conning tower where the ship is fought from at the back. And you can see it's got little periscopes on top to allow the officers an outside view behind the armoured plate. And on top of that goes this structure here, which is a forward director, and it sits there. It's the lower forward director, and it sits on top of the conning tower and pivots accordingly, directing the main turrets. Behind that is this structure here, which sits here. And this is the base of what we could call the command tower, and it has its own decks. This is the tower itself, which climbs up from there, and on top of this sits this structure, which is the upper navigating bridge. It's got a foghorn there, bridge wings, small platforms that are used by signalmen when they're semaphoring, and it again has its own wooden deck structure. On top of that is this tower here, which sits right in on top of this one, butting up against the navigating bridge. And it again has an artworks deck that sits there, and just off the top of my head I think there's a 40mm cannon sits in there. I'm just scanning the instructions to see if we can see it. No, can't see it, but I'm sure there's a 40mm cannon sits there. On top of that there is again an armoured director, and this is where the gunnery officer would sit, and he would be in here, again periscopes, directing the guns of the ship. And that whole structure sits on top of this with again an artworks wooden deck. Sitting on top of that there is this pivot part, which the upper gun director sits on top of that, and this is a fire directing radar that sits on top there. Once all this structure is put together, I'll go through it, because there are at the moment 3 radar sets, or 3 sets of radar arrays that are included in this. There's this one here, there's one underneath it, and there are small radar aerials on all sides of this structure here. Now what I'm going to do next is I'm going to put the artworks wooden decks on. I'm not going to bore you with that because you've seen me do it before, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to put all the decks together, Then we're going to start assembling this in sections, because I don't want to put too many sections on together, or with it lying about it'll get knocked about, and that radar array there is very, very delicate. There's a lot of folding, a lot of bending, a lot of twisting of parts. It's held together with glue at the moment, but it is very, very delicate. So until we do the final assembly of the ship, this has got to be looked after. Again, there are railings, brass railings on there. There's very tiny brass railings on here. There should in fact have been 2 sets of these put on, another set there and there, but the mounting place for them is interfered with by, again, sets of binoculars here and here, and they really interfere with the mounting of these signal platforms, so I left these ones off from there and there. There's quite a lot of brass on this.
Well, this is the completed command tower structure with the forward navigation bridge and the forward director and conning tower. It's all just test fitted together just now with white glue, but I thought I'd let you see what it looked like complete. But I'm not going to store it like this, I'm going to store it in pieces to avoid damage.
That's been quite a bit of work, and it's taken quite a long time to do it. I'm sorry for the delays, but there's a lot of things that I've been busy outside of just model making. That's the command tower now finished, in sections albeit, but it's finished. And the next area that we're going to have a look at in part 11 is the hangar and some of the parts constructed round about the hangar. So I'll see you shortly, I hope, for part 11.